the second in our series of the Autonomous Business Continuity webinars. Today we're going to be doing the autonomous remote working in a little bit more detail than we did last time out. So first off, we're going to start with going through the agenda. So for that, we've got the world today. We're going to go and recap what we were talking about last time out. We're going to go through remote working in general, how we can kind of assist with the new remote way of working. Then we're going to dive into some specifics around device management as well as collaboration. And we're going to go through those topics, see how they kind of tie into this whole remote working piece, and then go into how the Autonomous Cloud Extend capability can allow you to kind of further your environment and get a little bit more out of those remote working capabilities. So to start off, we're going to recap with what we went through, some of the issues with last time. So if we look back to last year, it was very much around increasing productivity, how we enable mobile working, improving people's work-life balances while still remaining compliant and being able to reduce costs. A lot of what we saw last year was around capital expenditure for that cost reduction piece. So it's what is the capital amount, how can we reduce the capital amount, but also trying to get to moving towards this new kind of mobile way of working where people are on the move all the time, going between meetings, how we can increase their productivity between meetings. Now, when we kind of flip that into this year and obviously how the economic climate and the social climate has changed, what we're seeing now is a change towards home working for fairly obvious reasons. But what that kind of drives is a need for low touch management. We aren't going to have people who come into the office even 2, 3, 4 times a week. They're now coming into the office rarely, if ever, which means that relying on something that requires you to be in the office isn't something that's possible to do anymore. So you need to be able to get to that towards that low touch area. You need a much greater level of flexibility within that environment. You need to be able to adapt and change as the world is changing, generally on like a weekly by weekly basis at this point. So we need to be able to adapt very quickly. We can't have stuff that is a very rigid system that takes a long time to adapt and change. We also need to increase the availability. In the times that we're in, it's actually become probably more important that downtime isn't a thing that we experience, especially for users. If users are experiencing problems, it's actually going to cause the business more problems because with them being remote, the time it takes to fix those problems is even higher. So it's how can we go and make sure all the devices are available, all the users are productive, and all the applications they need access to are available as well. And the last thing is cash flow. This is something that has obviously become very important over kind of the last probably 3 or 4 weeks, I'll probably say, is how can we make sure there is the cash flow in the business that we need in order to be able to survive. We've gone from how can we reduce capital expenditure and how can we kind of optimize that capital expenditure into kind of the here and now. What is the way that we can make sure that we can go and stay running as a business going forwards? We're seeing customers move away from large capital expenditures to make sure that they have that capital in their business to invest in other areas other than necessarily big IT platforms. So it's how can we move more towards that operational or pay per month or pay per use style of acquiring things. So if we look at kind of the problems that we're seeing customers come across now, the first one is the VPN capability. I kind of went through this last time, but I'll go through it again as well. Is this VPN capability is something that is limited and prohibited some of the remote working capabilities that our customers and as well as internally within Ultima want. So we're seeing all of these problems. We're living through the exact same pain that you are, and this is what we're doing to kind of get through these problems. So that's why we want to kind of bring it out to our customers as well, is relying on VPNs is good for certain applications and good for certain use cases. If you're using it in a limited sense, which generally you were in a kind of more, I hesitate to use the word traditional, but if you were looking into last year, you wouldn't have everyone in the office connecting on a VPN. You might have the 10, 20, 30% maybe that are outside of the office connecting in on a VPN, which was much more manageable. The amount of connections you can have to a particular VPN gateway or firewall or whatever may be a limiting factor for you. So trying to get away from that is quite an important thing to a lot of businesses. That being said, there is often a legacy application. These are applications that don't necessarily have a web front end to them, they require being on the same network as it. So whether this be old CRM systems, maybe an ERP system, something of that kind of style that require you to be on that same network, mean that you can't just go ditch all the VPNs and it'll be fine, because you aren't on the right networks, you won't have access to it, and it will cut a lot of staff who need to be able to be productive off. The third thing is management. Being able to manage the devices and manage the security posture is really important. Given what's happening currently in the cybersecurity world, I actually read an article this morning where there have been 500 different scams that have been shut down within the last month, focusing on email and exploiting the whole COVID-19 area. Loads of people emailing out about invoices and stuff like that. You need to make sure that all the security policy on those devices is correct, because if that gets breached and you've got a VPN, that's not too difficult for them to get back into the corporate network. So thinking about it from that side, being able to manage the device and manage the security on the device is very important. And the last thing is productivity. If the users aren't productive, then we're not going to be able to get through this together. So it's being able to make sure that they have the collaboration, they can actually still talk to the normal people that they would do, they can still get hold of them, and also allowing them to have the kind of more personable aspect of it. One of the things that we've done internally is we do quite a lot of video conferencing. So whether it be updates from management and senior management, or just kind of general conversations, there's a lot of the time we'll do it on a video conference to allow us to have that same personable aspect that we would have if we were in an office. So if we kind of delve into this a little bit, this kind of fits into those three areas we're talking about: the kind of general remote working setup, so where we're talking about how we get access to the files, the applications that we would traditionally, and then we'll go into the kind of collaboration and device management pieces, which are towards the kind of end of these four problems. So the first thing we're looking at, and this is some of the stuff that we went through last time, we will be going more deeper into this as we go through this, is the remote working piece. So there's two different offerings in here. There is the basic one, which is literally being able to have people access their own machines whilst at home without having to use VPNs, etc. And it gives a much more kind of scalable aspect to that. And the second one is the kind of more advanced way of doing it, being able to build that scalable platform that is resilient. It doesn't have that reliance on a singular device in order to be able to do it. They obviously have slightly different amount of times, days to get online, but these are considerably lower than what we've historically been seeing. So if we go into the basic offering, what we're looking at here is kind of how we can reutilize the assets. So we're not trying to kind of reinvent the wheel here. We're not trying to go and put a whole new solution in place that actually we just need to physically be able to access the devices and the services that we need to as users quickly, simply, without having to do too much. There's obviously a few other bits on here, but what we're trying to look at is being able to standardize this as much as possible. For a vast majority of our customers, the deployment style that we've chosen is going to be completely suitable. Obviously, there will be cases where it needs to be customized, and it doesn't mean that this can't be. But the configuration requirements for this specific offering are very much standardized. They're not being bespoke as part of it, but it does allow you to do this very simply and very quickly as well, which is quite important. So if we go into this, and this is where we start getting into some of the more detail here in terms of how we're going to be deploying it, what we're going to be doing with it. So in this scenario, we've got the two offices. They're running Windows 10 machines. Obviously, there are various other machines and etc. that you can go and access through this, and you can do this in one office, two offices, three offices, 5 offices, doesn't matter. But this is to give you an example. So for these, they're connected via WAN connectivity, so they are on the same network as such. There are ways to do this across multiple offices. If you want each individual office has an internet breakout, possibilities to do that as well. Once again, this isn't the only way to deploy it. This is the way we've chosen to do this, to try and make this as simple as possible and as scalable as possible. What we'll do from there is we'll install the Citrix Cloud connectors in the main office. So this will be, they're effectively like virtual machines that you have running in that environment. They connect out to the Citrix Cloud. This allows you to get rid of any kind of VPN access you need, because this is running it through a secure web gateway at that point. So you're not having to use a VPN connection in, which is going to save on all of the kind of a bit forcing you kind of down that VPN route, using all those licenses, etc. And it'll allow you to kind of alleviate those problems. It also alleviates some of the support problems with having to run VPNs, support VPNs, etc. And then from here, a user will connect in via the Citrix Cloud. That will then route their session via the connectors out to whatever device, obviously, they are given access to as from their user profile. So all of this is very set up. There is a whole heap of information on the back end of exactly how this happens. So if you are interested in something like this, feel free to get in contact. I'm not going to go through literally everything today, because as you can imagine, we would be here for a hell of a long time going through all this in detail and exactly how everything's set up. But there is a full detail on how we run through this, what the actual requirements specifically are. But generally, it is just AD connected accounts. We need a couple of OUs and GPO pieces set up, but actually it's a relatively low level of requirement, and most of it will be set up within most customers' environments as it is. So it's not too much of a concern from that side. When we move on to the advanced one though, this is where we get into something that's slightly different. You'll notice the scale requirement's actually the same for the low end. This is more for the amount of days it takes. So it's going to take 2 days, and in those 2 days we'll be able to do 25 users for the basic one, and for 5 days we'll be able to do the 25 users, if not slightly more, for the advanced one. So that's where that kind of minimum comes from. It doesn't mean, obviously, if you have 20 users and you wanted to do it for, it's not impossible to do. It's just that's the minimum kind of costing point, if that makes sense. So what we're looking at doing here is being able to deploy a customized, well, your customized Windows 10 image. So you can provide the Windows 10 image. It can be built to your specification with your applications on it. We will then convert that into a build that is capable to be run within the Citrix environment. And then we'll deploy it out for you. This is going to be run as it's out in the public cloud in order to be able to do it. It can be done in your data center, but generally we'd recommend it done in public cloud for this. It allows you to completely control your cost metrics at that point. We do actually have quite a few customers who are using this kind of deployment and have scaled up this kind of deployment for the current situation, where they've had a Citrix deployment. It may have been on-prem, it may have been out in the cloud already, and actually they've scaled up the amount of effectively virtual desktop instances they have. And what they've done is they've built a schedule around this to make sure that they're optimizing the cost as much as possible. So they've set specific shutdown points because they know when their workforce is going to be working. So then that's allowed them to do quite a good job of the cost management on it. And that has allowed them to kind of weather this storm quite efficiently without having to go and spend way more than they needed to in order to be able to do it. So that's where you get that kind of flexibility and that scale from here. And that also helps you manage your billing as well, because that's quite an important thing at this point, is how do we go and make sure that we're only paying for what we're using and we're not paying for more than what we actually require. Because historically, as an industry, we've been quite good at making sure that we are going to be covered even in the worst case scenario, or what we thought was the worst case scenario, and therefore we've possibly been a little bit conservative. We may have slightly kind of, I wouldn't say over exaggerated, but we've made sure that we are going to be suitably covered for any kind of requirements that come up within a reasonable kind of set of requirements. Whereas now we're getting to the point where actually we can do this kind of more ad hoc. So we can, if we need a bit more resource, we can go and get that bit more resource quite efficiently. So if we look at how that's actually deployed, we'd have typically a data center. It could be an on-prem data center, it could be a cloud data center. It doesn't matter. This is where your applications are hosted, and that's the main thing for this. We then have an Azure tenant. Once again, it could be the same as Azure tenant, in which case obviously we don't need the VPN for that. It may be maybe your data centers in AWS for argument's sake, or it may be on-prem, in which case you'd need to have a VPN connection between the two. There's not a huge amount we can do about that, unfortunately. If you have an express route, equally, an express route would count for this as well. If you're in some of the colo providers, they provide various cloud switching services as well, so you may be able to leverage that if you're in a colo provider. Either way, we need some form of connecting the data center where the apps are into the Azure tenant or the Azure subscription that is going to have the resources sat within it. So within here, this is where we would deploy those the Windows 10 image that you've provided to us. At that point, obviously, we've gone through the configuration to make sure it's going to be compatible with doing a Windows 10 VDI-based deployment. We would then put the connectors in there as well, and that would be connected out to the Citrix cloud at that point. At that point, the Citrix cloud is acting as the broker back into your Azure tenant. So we're not talking about any VPNs into here. You're not having to do anything funky like that. You're not having to open up any kind of RDP ports or anything like that. And I have only just done one user here because this got really ugly when I tried to draw the picture with more than one user on it. But this can be scaled to 100s, thousands of users if you so wish. So that's the idea of the deployment. It is trying to keep this as simple as possible. Once again, there are requirements that sit within this. They're a bit more strenuous on this one, as you can imagine, because there's a bit more to be configured. And if you don't have an Azure tenant, we'll go into the future when we're talking about that extend piece at the end, about how this can all be set up really simply for you. So don't worry about all that. If you don't have an Azure subscription at this point, that's not a problem as part of this. That can be included as part of doing all of this. So that is the kind of remote working piece. As I said, I can go into a load more detail with this. I equally don't want to take all of the time on this because there's two other areas to cover. If you do have any further questions specifically around the remote working piece, either the basic or the advanced one, then feel free to reach out to me or reach out to your account manager, and we'll more than happily help you with kind of any further information that you require on this. So yeah, that's the remote working piece. This then kind of quite neatly dovetails into the device management piece. Obviously, being able to have the corporate devices themselves is great, and being able to have people access them and use them. But given the fact that this is likely to be lasting in the kind of the new norm for at least a good another month, if not 3 months, God knows how long. If anyone knows the answer to that, please feel free to tell me, because I'm completely no idea how long this is going to take. But we're not expecting this to change for the foreseeable future, at least. There will be things you need to do. There'll be patches you need to roll out. There'll be new applications that need to be rolled out. There will be new projects that actually happen as part of kind of business as usual, for want of a better term. And we need to make sure those devices are updated, secure, and also any new applications are deployed as we need to. The problem is we end up with a balancing act. On the one side, you've obviously got security and compliance. You want to make sure all your devices are as secure as possible, as compliant as possible, up to date, no unauthorized access, all that kind of good stuff that we'd expect. But on the other side, you've got the usability. We don't want users to be over kind of managed and over secured, where they can't actually get to doing their normal working experience. I'm sure we've all been in places, worked at firms in the past where the security policy has been great, and there is a good reason for everything being in place, but actually users, or yourself in some cases, because I've definitely suffered at this a few times, we've actually been penalized as workers for just trying to effectively do what we should do, because there's a lot of draconian policy that may have been put in place. So we need to make sure we get that balance where users are productive, however, they are still secure. So as part of this device management piece, what we're looking at doing is trying to cover off the configuration, the application deployment, basically making sure that the people who need applications, based on their policy and their profile, get the applications they need. So trying to improve their productivity. They don't have to come to us to go and request an application. They are automatically deployed an application if their profile matches the fact that they may need it. So for example, finance may need a particular finance application that they have, Or you may have someone in sales and you have a particular pipeline application. Someone in sales is going to need a pipeline application. They don't need access to the finance piece. Someone in finance equally needs access to the finance application. They don't need access to the pipeline piece. So it's trying to get that profiled correctly. And then that allows you to kind of, in some ways, help with compliance, but also be able to manage the licensing costs as well. Because a lot of these things, there are per user licenses. So being able to kind of manage that profile is very important. And one of the things that probably doesn't get touched on enough, and probably should be touched on more, is data protection. So being able to control access to applications and data when they're on devices. So that's kind of at a high level what this device management piece is about. Once again, it kind of goes down into a similar form of engagement to what we were talking about before. So just kind of going through this engagement flow, what that engagement flow actually looks like. So it's generally a 6-day engagement that we'll do for this. Once again, this is very much a standardized engagement. The first 1 to 3 days are kind of all of the kind of prior to deployment aspects of it. So this takes all the user identity synchronization, any hybrid device identity. So this is linking to AD, Azure AD, etc. Automated device enrollment, device configuration, and the data protection piece. So setting up some of those policies, working out what those policies need to be. On day 4 and 5, we'll do a pilot. So this will be with a select group within the organization to make sure that obviously everything's working properly. We're not kind of doing anything too draconian in terms of security policy. Actually, the applications are deploying correctly, everything's integrated correctly. And then at the end of this, because what we realize when we're dealing with end users, there's quite often issues that will come up, not necessarily during the pilot, because often the pilot are the more enabled users. There is a day of post-deployment support as part of this as well. So it allows you as one of our clients to feel kind of comfortable that you're going to have the ability to call on someone if something isn't quite right, or if there's a user being a little bit difficult and something needs to be tweaked in a little bit to make it easier for a specific set of users. Being able to have that is going to be really quite valuable, and that's something we see especially in engagements that involve specific stuff that is specifically to end users and specific to end user devices. Having that is really helpful. So this is one of the big topics. Collaboration is something that kind of is on the minds of everyone right now. How do we make sure that people are still being able to do their normal, as much as possible, their normal job, while still being able to communicate with the same people they would, and being able to work in the same way, and being able to kind of still have that standardized work environment for as much as we can. And as part of this, we'd recommend Teams. So Teams is something that we've deployed internally. We did have a webinar on this, I believe it was last week, if not the week before. I do have a link to the VOD of that as well at the end of this. So there are some resources you can use for it. So to give you an idea, this is roughly where Teams is put in terms of the ecosystem of the kind of collaboration piece in the Microsoft land. So you've got Yammer, which is much more used for kind of talking to people outside your organization. Email for the targeted communications. I mean, if we don't know what email is, we probably wouldn't all be here. Then you get the SharePoint, which is the kind of files, content kind of repository, but that can be used by all of these. And then the last one is Teams. So this is more around your frequent collaborators. As much as say people you work with regularly on core projects, this can be people outside the organization, it can be people within your organization. It completely supports both. And the differentiation that I see between Teams and Yammer, and this is from my own personal use of the two, is Yammer is much more of a forum for, here is a general piece of information to a large group of people, whereas Teams, you're more focusing on a specific project or a specific group of people within a project. So that's how I've generally used it. And one of the things I really like about Teams, and actually is one of my favorite things, is being able to use the back end of it, which is SharePoint, in order to be able to have files and stuff which are specific to a group of people or a group or a project easily accessible without having to go through another interface. Really helpful. So some of the features, and this is a small amount of them. These are the ones that I think are probably the most important out of the lot. So as you can guess, there is instant messaging. You'd be very surprised if there wasn't. So a lot of people have kind of said, is this a replacement for Skype for Business? And working as not a Microsoft employee, this is pretty much all the way there for doing it, and it does a load more stuff. So kind of the chat meet stuff that you'd expect for kind of Skype for Business, the standard instant messaging kind of platforms completely exists, as does the kind of audio calling, the video calling. So this includes all of the features you'd expect. So we're actually using this across the business, so we can do kind of external calling as part of this. So all of that exists within Teams. There are obviously some limitations for this. I'm not going to say that it can do absolutely everything, and we do have kind of a pretty well-defined list of can and cannot do's for Teams. So if you are kind of curious about this, if you think there's a specific scenario that you want to kind of check whether it's going to work for your organization or not, then once again, feel free to reach out. We'll be able to kind of work with you and actually work out, is it going to be a suitable use case? We're not just going to throw it in there and just assume that it's going to work. We are going to make sure we verify it, that it's actually going to be a suitable kind of deployment mechanism for you. But the really, really interesting thing for me is, weirdly enough, the Teams aspect of Teams, which is a bit of a confusing statement. But if you look at it in itself, so this is actually ironically a screenshot from my own Teams. Obviously, I've had to hide some of the stuff in it. This is actually one of the really, really interesting pieces of Teams, and this is one of the things that I think is really key for the remote working aspect. Is if you're used to being in an office and let's say you're part of a project to deliver, let's say, a specific application, generally you might have a file share, you may have a SharePoint site, depending on exactly kind of where you are, that will have various pieces of information in it. It may have Excel sheets, it may have kind of some workflow documentation, you may have a OneNote in there, for example. But what you can do with Teams is you can have that team site, and we've used this actually quite extensively for a couple of our internal projects as well. And as you can see at the top, you can have like a wiki in there. So I've actually spent quite a few days recently writing a wiki for one of the internal projects that we have. So everything is documented in there. We know exactly where we can find it. We can go and search through that. We can actually go and reference stuff. And that's really helpful for people who are trying to pick stuff up. We can have task management in there. So if you've got, let's say, seven things that need to be done, you can actually divvy them up to people within that team. You can then build flows within that. So if someone puts a document in the file section, it then goes and pings, let's say, the lead contributor to it, so they know that's been done. Whatever it may be, there is a load of stuff that kind of fits within Teams, and it has made it really powerful and really easy to kind of contribute to and actually work with, and be able to kind of build that out and be able to build the multiple channels within it. So you may have an overall project to deliver a specific application, but you have subsets within that where you can have kind of the individual channels which have their own flows, their own wikis, their own task management as part of it. And being able to build that out is really, really, really cool. The other stuff that I've kind of mentioned in here, so the video interaction, so that's one thing that we've been quite keen on, is to make sure that, and once again, you don't have to use this every single time, and I'm not saying use it every single time because you will get bored of seeing everyone's faces every now and again, but being able to kind of keep that human interaction. There's something very much more personable when you're actually seeing someone's face, seeing their reaction to what you're saying. You can interpret a lot more from it, and it also kind of, especially considering we're all kind of remote working, it allows you to actually see some of your colleagues that you may actually get on with quite well. So that's quite a nice feature. Seems really simple, but it's something that is so often missed out as part of these things. And the last thing, and this is actually something that we've used quite extensively for various document collaboration pieces, is this is effectively a SharePoint functionality, but it's drawn through Teams, is being able to collaborate on files. So that is really helpful. So one of the things that, as part of one of the projects that we've been doing internally, is we've had to have like 3 or 4 people contributing to a single document, being able to make that happen in real time, whether that's them using the full fat, let's say, version of Word, whether they do it just online, whether they do it within Teams, it doesn't matter. And that is really helpful for when you need to go and get something done really quickly. And it's one thing that is generally quite missed out on and can get quite confusing when, if you're doing it, let's say everyone has an individual copy of the file, they make edits to it, then they email it around, then you have to merge the edits together somehow. Doing that is a real pain. So if we can, so being able to use this as a collaboration tool is really, really effective and has saved God knows how much time, if I'm being very honest about it. The next thing is slightly on a different topic to what we have been talking about. But this is FASTTRACK. So FASTTRACK is more around how you can kind of further your experience in it. So allowing you to have a kind of a much more guided approach to your deployment. So it's not for the specific deployment itself. It is for when you've actually gone and started using the service. So there's a myriad of things that this is available for, and a lot of the stuff we talked about is eligible for FASTTRACK. So obviously Teams, 365, Intune, which is some of the underpinnings of that device management piece, Azure AD, Exchange Online, etc. All of those fit within this FASTTRACK piece. So obviously there are some minimums to it, as you'd expect, but generally they're not too strenuous in terms of the minimum. But it allows you to get that kind of additional assistance and additional guidance to deploying it. So if these are some of the things that you're interested in, and you want a bit more guidance, or you've started deploying it maybe, and you kind of want a bit of guidance from it, then you may be eligible for FASTTRACK. And as part of that, that allows you to get that support from our best practice, and allow you to kind of further your kind of understanding of it and also adoption of it. Because one of the big things that we've seen is there's no use, let's say, deploying Teams without actually skilling up people on how to use Teams, how to manage Teams, what it's actually capable of. Because if you just deploy Teams, people will use it just as an instant messaging platform, which is fine, but you're definitely not getting the most value out of what you can do at it. So it's being able to get the best value out of what you're paying for. And given the economic situation that we're at, it's going to be a big driver, I think, over the next 6 to 9 months, is we've invested in these pieces of technology. How can we get the most value out of the technology that we've invested in? Whether that's enhancing our security posture, whether it's making people more productive, whether it's allowing for better collaboration over the business so projects can be done faster. What can be done with the technology that we have to make that technology more effective for our business? And that's going to be a kind of a demand from management, directors, C-level people. That's going to be probably one of the biggest things that they're going to be doing over the next kind of 3 to 9 months. And even within our business, we've started seeing this. We're obviously a very technology-driven business. We've got all of this technology, all this great technology. How can we make sure that we're leveraging it to the best of our ability? What can we do to make what we're doing better? How can we go and get further with it? So whether that's be enhancing the collaboration that we have with Teams, whether it's being able to scale our remote working capability, whether it's being able to manage devices more efficiently. And that's something that we're very much driving to. So everything you see here is very much driven from what we're doing internally. Is we obviously have similar pains to what everyone else is going through. We've never had everyone working remotely. We've never had all of these devices suddenly out of the office that are not coming back into the office for months on end. We've never had, how do we go and get hundreds of people access to these internal applications that we've never thought about these kind of problems before. So we are very much facing these problems, and these are the solutions we're coming up with internally, and these are the solutions our customers are demanding from us. So this is why we want to bring it out to everyone else out there. We do feel your pain, and we want to try and make everything better for ourselves as well as for you to try and make that as simple as possible. And the last thing we're going to talk about today is the autonomous extend piece. So this is where we're going into how do we actually deploy some of this, because a lot of this needs a certain amount of resource to do it. And given obviously what's happened in terms of this being a global thing, this isn't just isolated to the UK, is being able to get the supply chain that you need in order to be able to do this on-prem has been a little bit of a problem. I'm not saying it's impossible to get stuff, but it's certainly become more of a challenge. Even as simply as getting laptops has become a lot more of a challenge over the last few months than I think it's probably ever been. And I'm sure some of you have felt that pain from management asking for things that are just very difficult to go and provide. So one of the things we're looking to try and do is how can we go and leverage a scalable form of resource, not something that is limited to physically what you have, but how can we go and extend your capability? Hence the Autonomous Cloud Extend. So this is leveraging Azure at the back end, and it is part of the wider Autonomous Cloud portfolio. So as part of this, you have Autonomous Cloud, which is the kind of overarching kind of primary product, if you will. Underneath this, you have Migrate, DR, and Extend. So what we're talking about specifically here is Extend. So this allows you to extend what you may have on-prem. So whether you have a small environment physically set on-prem that's running your various different application servers, whatever it may be, you'll have typically an Azure compatible VPN appliance. So whether that be, let's say, a Checkpoint or Meraki device or whatever it may be, there's a whole swathe of compatible VPN devices. So generally, most people will have some form of compatible VPN device. And once that's done, basically what we'll do is we'll allow you to have an extension to your data center. So instead of you going, oh God, how do I go and deploy, let's say, 50 remote desktop sessions on this platform that I've built for my applications, and it's completely finely sized for my applications. I've got a little bit of room on there. It may be 10, 20%, whatever it may be. But actually, I don't have 100% more room, which is actually what I require. This allows you to extend that out into the Azure environment, be able to leverage those resources as you require. Obviously, you can use that as part of, if you want them to be turned on, turned off at various times to make sure you manage that cost, completely acceptable to do. So what we're looking to do as part of this is we have a ready-to-go solution. So it's built and configured in under a day. So if you want to basically press the go button and do this, being able to roll out virtual desktop environments doesn't take the months that it used to. I've been involved with VDI deployments that have taken months just to get to the first desktop, and that's from date of order. And I'm not saying there's anything particularly wrong with that. There's certain reasons why those needed to take place, but it's not something that can happen. Oh, hello Google. But it's not something that can happen in today's environment. If we wait months for things to happen, then we just wouldn't, a lot of businesses wouldn't be in business at that point. So we need to make sure that everything is ready to go and done as quickly as possible. The second thing is it does really need to be secure by design. Is one of the things that we're seeing now is people don't want security as an add-on, especially as compliance becomes more and more important. Obviously, we have the dreaded 4 letters of GDPR, and you need to be able to prove that you're doing everything possible to improve your security posture as part of it. So what we do in everything that we're delivering is we're making sure that it is secure by design. So all the offerings that we've talked about, we're making sure that it is a secure connection from end to end. We're making sure that everything is delivered via HTTPS or another kind of secured layer. Exactly the same with this. Security is built in on every single layer of what we do. It's not just the firewalling, it's the security policies, how we set up network security groups, all that kind of stuff. But that is all automated as part of it. Nothing you have to set up. Everything is provided as you would expect it to be provided, and is validated continually to check that it is continually secure. It's also part of CSP. So For those who are not aware what CSP is, CSP is the cloud solution platform. So this is the Microsoft way of consuming Azure for most organizations. There are some other ways, like you can do that, obviously the pay-per-use mechanism, and the very, very large customers will be able to still use an enterprise agreement. However, if you want support from a partner, CSP is the way that Microsoft are driving their clients to go towards, because it allows them to have the kind of additional support from from partners like Ultima to be able to further the Azure service further than just the kind of, I want 5,000 VMs, give them to me. It allows you the kind of a bit of additional service, a bit of additional support in terms of kind of bringing those online. And the last thing is, it is migration ready. So we want to make sure that we don't just give you a platform, we give you a way in which you can actually use that platform. Whether that be moving some of the stuff you've got in order to free up some capacity to put new applications on, or whether it's just you've run out of space on the existing environment and you can't get anything quick enough to there, whether it be actually you want to just build new and you want to just go from there, that's up to you. But we're building it to make sure that it is ready to go, and it's not just, here is some Azure, good luck. It's, okay, how can we actually help you use that and actually get the best out of it? So we've only got a couple more quick pieces now. So in terms of actually what we're doing as part of this, there is a relatively simple Q&A piece. Basically, we take some of the configuration that you've got on your on-prem environment, we then document that, we then basically come up with, this is what the design for the environment looks like. The reason why we do this is we want to be able to try and keep stuff as similar as possible to what the on-prem looks like. Obviously, it's not entirely possible. It's a very different style of deployment, but it's making sure that we're getting an idea of how it's an extension and not just a different platform. And that's one of the things that we really, really kind of want to build into the design of when we did this kind of stuff, is we don't want it to be what cloud deployments have been previously. A lot of cloud deployments previously have been, here is an on-premise scenario. It's got some VMware servers or some Hyper-V servers. It's got some switching. It's got some storage. It's got some backup. It's all great. It's in its own bubble. We then have Azure or AWS or GCP or whatever it may be over here. It's got a completely different setup. It's done in a completely different way. And it has no way of talking back to the on-prem environment. It has no way of moving stuff between it. It's just out there and it's different, and therefore we have to manage it in a very different way. We want to try and make this as seamless as possible to move between the two. So as part of this, as you can see, what we'll do is we'll take some of the stuff that you've got, so we'll generate kind of the VNets. We'll try and do them on a similar kind of setup to how you've done it as well. So you're actually getting an idea of what this looks like. And you'll actually be able to kind of use this as part of kind of almost like a template piece of, okay, this is the style of environment that we've got right now. We want to get something that is relatively close going forward. So as you see, you can select the on-prem VPN device, so it can automatically configure the VPNs to you, or at least give you the documentation on how to do that. So we're trying to build this as an extension, as you can see, rather than here is two things that happen to have a connection between the two. They're very much, how can we go and scale this going forward? With that being said, this is obviously not the only thing that we're talking about as part of this autonomous business continuity. I did mention previously there was a Teams webinar. There is a link that will be included within the slides to that Teams webinar. If you want a bit more information generally on the autonomous cloud piece, because I did only briefly touch on it, there is the information around autonomous cloud at that link. There's a load of resources and stuff within there, and if that is something, that kind of extend capability is something that does interest you, then either feel free to reach out, look through there, register interest, whatever you wish to do in terms of looking through that stuff, but I would highly recommend it. And there is a webinar coming up this Friday on business continuity, how you scale, optimize, and protect yourself. So this is around some of the backup kind of DR kind of scenarios, how we can help you do that in a very quick, very optimized manner without having to go through the usual fun and games of trying to set up a backup and DR environment. So I would recommend that if that's of interest to you. That can be whether that's for a cloud environment. There are ways in order to be able to use that on-prem as well. So it doesn't matter kind of which mechanism that you're using right now. That's something that's useful. There will be a third webinar, I believe it's next week, that kind of goes into some even more stuff with the autonomous business continuity. But as I said, there is a load of resources around here. Feel free to reach out to us if you've got any questions, or to your account manager, whoever it may be. And I will say thank you very much for watching, and I will bid you a good day. Thank you.